So then once you've got the bike on the trainer itself, how should you think about everything else that you're going to set up in the space? So we have a photo here in terms of our testing space in the studio where we do with like the lactate and VO2 max tests, for example. And this we've kind of tried to set up in the way we wanted to describe for all of you. And the first one that I have a real thing about, which I see so often on people's Instagram feeds and stories, is when they have their bike on a trainer and the screen off to the side or too low down, and it's just really training a bad posture and a bad head position on the bike. It's training you to look in the wrong direction. And then when you get onto the road in the spring, you're trying to hold your head in the direction to look at the road, and you can't do it because you've trained these muscles to look down, look to the side, do something that just isn't real. And then when you need them to do what they should be doing, they can't do that on the road. And it's a really simple one, just getting the screen straight level in the direction of the horizon that you need to look at and at the right height relative to the bike to do that. So that's a really simple one to get right, but also one that we see gets wrong quite regularly just from not thinking about it, which is, yeah, if no one points it out, it's something that is quite easy to miss. Definitely recommend some kind of cooling device, a fan predominantly, just to try and regulate body temperature, and it just makes the ride more enjoyable. Like I said as well, it can help to reduce some of the sweat buildup and some of the chafing issues that you might get if you get too sweaty on the trainer. And that also can help a little bit with not dripping too much on the handlebars, on the bearings, things like that. So big fan, hugely recommended. The trainer itself, we kind of spoke about like the direct drive turbo trainers. There's also options, you don't see it so often now, but things like rollers, for example. So we do have a set of these at the studio where the bike is either semi-held or not held at all, and you're just riding on essentially a few cylinders that you're just spinning the bike on top of. They can be incredibly good for training technique. It's less good if you're trying to do kind of more specific intervals, for example. People do, but it's quite hard to train yourself to balance and do high intensity intervals on a roller at the same time without crashing. Basically, it's definitely doable. You can see on YouTube, for example, some fantastic examples of people making rollers look really simple, but they do take a little bit of practice to get used to. Definitely a cheaper option though, compared to things like a turbo trainer, and it will avoid any kind of warranty issues, for example, on the frame because the bike isn't being held laterally. And then also like you say, the kind of newer idea is to have a more specific indoor trainer bike. Obviously that costs more as the drawback, and it needs a permanent place to live. It's not something you can kind of fold away like you could with a turbo trainer when the summer comes around. It's still big and it needs to sit somewhere basically. So it's, if there's space for it and the budget allows, it's a fantastic solution to have a specific trainer bike, like the Wahoo Kicker bike we have in the picture, for example. They do give you a very realistic feel on the road, and they pair very nicely to all of the apps. It's a very, like I said, it's a new solution. So everything is designed to work with how indoor training is focused now, with a lot of the interactivity and connectivity that people are doing with their indoor training. Like with the sessions that you guys have now on a Sunday with us. So things like that, for example, the indoor bikes are very good at connecting to, but at the same time, like I say, the drawback, as with most things in cycling and triathlon, is everything is expensive. So there are simpler solutions that you can do that get you exactly into the same place, just requires a little bit more work on your side. Another one that's kind of key to think about is where you're going to put the nutrition, particularly on some of these longer sessions. It's important to make sure that you're drinking enough, you're getting enough sugars in, that you're fueling the sessions properly so that you can actually hit all the intervals that you're trying to attain. So making sure that that's to hand, whether that's just in your back pocket like it would be outside, when you've got a small table that you put near the bike, for example, or bottle cages, obviously, on the bike itself. There's various ways to address that, but just something to bear in mind in terms of making that easily accessible and something that you can actually utilize during a session. And then finally, one that we advise to a lot of the people we work with is to look at using kind of mirrors and cameras and things to monitor how you're actually sitting on the bike. So that you can observe yourself while you're actually riding. So if you have kind of a camera pointed at the side, you can have your phone, for example, and streaming it onto the TV in front of you. Or a friend with a phone can record some videos, um, or just having some mirrors set up to allow yourself to observe how you look on the bike. Because one of the best ways to train that body positioning and the technique bubble we spoke about right at the start, if you think back to the Venn diagram we had with the three bubbles, the best way to train that one is to observe yourself. Is improving motor control is so much easier if you can see what you're doing. So not something you have to do on every session, for example, but if you do that maybe during part of the warm-up protocol once a week, just to observe how you look on the bike and to think more about the movements you're actually attaining. Cycling, I think, particularly with those that are doing triathlon, which some of you are from the names I recognize, um, it's the sport that people just think hasn't got much technique involved. But I come from a cycling background personally, so I'm slightly biased. But I do think there's so much you can improve just by sitting better on the bike, just by thinking about the movement control. The mechanical efficiency of pedal stroke can get better, so you can get the same watts for less energy. You can reduce the drag of the position drastically just by sitting better. You can reduce lower back issues, neck issues, shoulder issues, hand numbness, feet numbness. So many problems that can be solved just by thinking about how you're sitting on the bike and controlling the body movements better. And the best way to get a start point on that is to get some recordings of yourself and see how it looks. You're also more than welcome to send some videos through to us. We're always happy to have a chat through how things look, and if there's any things that we'd like to discuss that we can improve, yeah, do feel free to get some recordings of yourselves on the trainers and send those through. We're happy to have a look and see if there's anything that we can give you some pointers to try and improve areas. And then once everything's kind of set up and plugged in, the other thing to think on is how you're actually going to train. Like, what are you going to do once you're sitting on the bike? And now is kind of like a golden age of opportunities for that. So when I was racing when I was younger, it was sitting on a trainer staring at a concrete wall for as long as I could cope with my MP3 player and headphones in. But that's now, yeah, not something you have to endure. So you can look at things like Zwift is kind of the most common, but also like there's other apps with Trainer Road, Be Cool, Full Gas. There's pros and cons of all these things. Zwift is what's going to be used for the pain-free power woman sessions that are being run at the weekends, and that's generally the most social of the apps, for want of a better term. It's a very easy place to kind of meet with other riders, to do group sessions, to be able to have dialogue. So using things like Discord, the chat on Zwift itself, just discussions whilst riding. It just makes it a much more social experience, where training indoors historically has been quite a solitary and mind-numbing thing to do. Trainer Road has also started to do some things like that, where you can have almost like a small video conference going on during the session, where you all see each other, you can talk to each other. That I think has some limitations in terms of how many people can do things like that, but it was to try and replace what used to be, like in the UK, for example, we had kind of trainer sessions where everyone would turn up at like a town hall with their trainer and their bike, and they would all sit together and ride on their trainers as a group, which I don't think exists too much anymore. But Trainer Road have tried to create a virtual version of that, basically, with their system. And then Be Cool and Full Gas are more aiming to kind of allow you to ride real routes outdoors. So Full Gas, particularly if any of you are doing like with the Ironman events, for example. If you were doing Ironman and shopping the 73, you can actually ride the full route of that on Full Gas, where the resistance of the trainer is going to adjust depending on the intensity, the gradient of the road at the time, for example. So you get a real feel of some of those courses that you might actually race on. So Full Gas is actually quite an interesting one with their pairing and Ironman. That they're the ones that use the Ironman courses. So if you wanted to test the course out before a race, Full Gas is actually quite an interesting option to be able to play with. I think I actually addressed all the points when I was talking through there. But yeah, the other thing to say in terms of actually connecting to some of these apps, largely you would need a smart trainer. It's possible to do that with what would be classified as more as a dumb trainer, where the trainer itself doesn't have a power measurement, but you would still need then a power meter or a speed sensor at the very least to be able to control on that. Speed sensors are going to be a bit limiting if you don't have any power measurement at all. If you're wanting to do any of the kind of the events and races and stuff, some of them are going to limit you to not being able to enter without power data. But there are relatively low barriers to entry, and we can certainly help you all to discover what you would need to add or exchange. I guess most of you are using these kind of things already, but if any of you do have any specific questions, do feel free to reach out, and we're happy to send you some advice and pointers on what you would need. And then it's also important to try and record as much data as you can while you're indoors, I would personally say. So you don't necessarily need to use all the data all the time and look at it on every ride, but if you record enough things during every session, it makes it much easier for you to monitor progress. And particularly then again, if you end up with like a coach or something, that's going to be something that they're really going to be keen to see that data. Because when you're riding indoors without the data, it's very hard to quantify what you've actually done. Whereas outdoors, you can at least see, for example, if you did the same segment once a week for 10 weeks and it got faster over the duration of those, there's some quantifiable progress. Sitting on a trainer, it's much harder to see whether things are getting better if you're not recording stuff. I always think it's really important still to use the heart rate indoors, so you can start to see whether we're getting an improvement in the economy of the riding. So if we're getting the same power values for a lower heart rate, for example, over time, and that's going to fluctuate a little bit on different rides. So if you have too much coffee one morning, for example, the heart rate might be a little bit higher, particularly through the winter as well. If you maybe get like a small cold or something, things like that are going to affect the heart rate too. But in general, if we kind of can see a trend of lower heart rate to power ratios over the duration of a winter season, then we know we've made some progress in the training. As well, if you're then going to be doing more sort of specific sessions where we need to train in the correct zones, largely these kind of metrics I think are useful for making sure you don't train too hard. It's often not to be able to push yourself more. It's about making sure that you're not overdoing things, because it's really easy to fall into the trap of just trying too hard too much of the time, and the recovery then doesn't work so well. You're not going to get that kind of the super compensation points where you're actually going to be able to improve and progress. You're just going to dig a deeper and deeper hole basically. So using these metrics and training aids is actually really important to be able to monitor what you're doing and to stick to the training zones that you actually need to be in. As I was saying before as well, they can actually be quite useful to point out any excessive fatigue, or if you're maybe getting a little bit of a cold, you'll start to see some changes in those kind of heart rate values. So they can be useful for quite a lot of things.